All right, so let's get going on today's class. So today we're going to continue our look at a very important aspect of cognitive psychology, which is memory. So we're going to finish up our look at long-term memory structures today, and then we're going to begin our look at encoding and retrieval, another important aspect of long-term memory. So we're going to have a quick recap in terms of the types of long-term memory, explicit versus implicit, and then we're going to finish up our look at CogLab number 6. So we kind of went through the basics of it last time, and we'll take a look at some of the implications of that today. And then we're going to continue on by taking a look at evidence for different memory structures. So why do psychologists actually believe that there is implicit and explicit memory? Why do we actually believe that there is short-term and long-term memory? And these are different things. So we'll take a look at some of that evidence, and we're going to focus in on the case of Clive, who is an individual who lost his ability to form memories for the future, for future events, and also lost all of his previous memories. So he literally lives in a 20-second window of time, and we'll see the implications of that and what it tells us about explicit versus implicit memory. All right, so that's going to be part 1 of today, and we'll see how much of part 2 we can get to. But just to recap the types of long-term memory, so this is the memory that we have for things that we can remember for long periods of time, and it also seems to be a limitless store that we have access to. And we talked about explicit memories. These are memories that we are aware of having. They're used with conscious awareness. And those include episodic memories, memories for things that occurred to us in our lives. So if you're going to write your autobiography, that would be a written account of your episodic memories. And then also semantic memories. This is memory for the things that we know. So not necessarily, not things that happen to our lives, but facts that we know, languages that we learn, content and knowledge that we have falls into semantic memory. And then implicit memory is the other major type of long-term memory. And this is memories that we use without any awareness. And the CogLab that we're going to take a look at highlights implicit memory. And there's things like procedural memory, memory for doing things. So memory for how to walk, memory for how to throw a ball, memory for if you've ever typed in a password enough times, you know that you kind of remember not necessarily the password, but where your fingers go on the keyboard, such that if your keyboard is in a different layout, you have to think about it for a while. All of that is procedural memory. Priming is, we'll see an example of that coming up as well. That is where one stimulus prepares you to recall another stimulus, and that preparedness has to do with an implicit association between those two. And then conditioning, such as classical conditioning, is again a memory component, memory phenomenon, but again, we are not aware of it. So why are we afraid of certain things? Why do certain phobias develop? Why are we extremely happy to see some people? All of these emotional responses can be explained with classical conditioning, and yet we might be unaware of why is it that we have that experience. So again, procedural memory is what the CogLab is going to be looking at. So again, this is the memory that we clearly have because we clearly have skills that we have learned over time that we need to remember in order to do those skills. And yet, if you ask somebody, how is it that you walk, other than the phrase, I put one foot in front of the other, they really have no idea how they actually accomplish this feat of walking. And if you've ever taken a look at artificial intelligence and their attempts to make a robot that can walk even over like a little bump, you'll know how incredibly complex walking is, and we don't have that explicit knowledge. So it's an implicit procedural memory. All right, so real quick, just to recap our intro to the CogLab. On each trial, you saw a dot pop up in one of 4 locations. Your task, each location had a key on your keyboard, and your task was to simply press that key on your keyboard as quickly as you can when the dots occurred. and there were two presentation conditions for the dots. One of them was random, and that's where the dots never followed a pattern. They were just randomly dispersed amongst the 4 locations. Half of you were in this condition. The other half of you were in the pattern condition, where the dots actually followed a pattern. So they followed it was a complex pattern, but they actually followed a pattern, except for block number 5. And the question is were you able to, number 1, explicitly learn and remember that pattern? So were you aware after a while that, oh, wait, there's a pattern here, and yes, I know the pattern. It's far right, far left, right, left, 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 right, left, far right. Or were you unable to explicitly learn that? And then question number 2 was, did you have an implicit memory for this? So were you maybe unconsciously able to take advantage of the fact that there was a pattern, implicitly learn the pattern without your awareness, but it improved your performance? So just to jog your memory, this was your task, and you had keyboard commands to, as quickly as possible, indicate where those dots occurred. So as we saw last time, the results for the random condition. This is reaction time. These are the blocks or the trials that you went through. So with more experience, if you're getting better, the line should go down, indicating quicker reaction times. And sure enough, that's exactly what occurred. And we mentioned last time that this improvement here could be either explicit learning or implicit learning. So this could be learning and memory that you did with awareness. You could have, over time, much more quickly learned that, oh, M is what you press for far left. X is what you press for far right. These are the buttons that you press, and I am consciously aware that these are the buttons that you press. So therefore, part of this could be due to explicit memory that you learned. Another part of it could be due to implicit learning. So actually pressing those buttons is a procedure. And you could have implicitly learned, just the way that you learned how to walk, how to press those buttons, and you just got quicker and quicker because of implicit learning. So this learning curve here could be due to explicit or implicit learning, but the clearest evidence for implicit learning comes in the pattern condition. And when you compare the pattern condition to the random condition, you can see a difference here, that you are faster in the pattern condition, and that difference can only be explained by implicit learning. So we took an informal poll last time to see if anybody, number 1, knew that they were in the pattern condition. Most of you were not confident at all to say yes or no which condition you were in. And for those that thought they were in the pattern condition, nobody was able to say, yeah, this is what the pattern was. I explicitly learned that pattern. So you're definitely able to take advantage of that pattern, but you're not aware that there actually is a pattern. That's an example of implicit memory giving you that advantage. And interestingly, if you take a look at block number 5, remember this is the only block in the pattern condition where it went to random. You can see that, slight as it might be, if we focus in there was a very small increase in people's speed on the implicit condition, on the pattern condition, and this is the closest those 2 dots ever are. So this is probably due to some sampling error. If we ran the stats on this is probably not significantly different. So you can see that it wasn't that we just by chance got better people in the pattern learning condition. You actually were able to take advantage of that pattern, even though you were not aware of it. All right, so why was performance better in the pattern condition than in the random condition? We talked a little bit about this last time. It's due to the fact that you were able to implicitly learn and have an implicit memory for that pattern. You were able to take advantage of that pattern, even though you weren't aware of it. And one last chance. I know this is a big ask because it was a week and a half ago, I think, that you did this. But does anybody at all remember what the pattern was? Does that look familiar to anyone? So that was the actual pattern. The pattern that repeated over and over again was right, far, left, far, left, far left, far right, far left. So that was a pattern that repeated over and over again. And you can see it's a large pattern, but you were still able to implicitly learn it. You're still able to implicitly gain speed because you could take advantage of this regularity. So it's a very nice demonstration of the difference between implicit and explicit memory. We had no explicit memory for this, but we had an improvement in performance, thus we must have had implicit memory for it. Any final questions, comments on the CogLab? Yep.
The only reason that I recognized that I was in the pattern was that in the second line there, when it goes far right, right, for some reason I was always anticipating that it would move from the left side to the right side, but I would like be incorrect. Like instead of far right, I would do only right.
Okay.
That's how I noticed that. Like I was so eager to go that side, and like for some reason, I knew that it was going to be over there, but I kept making that mistake for some reason.
Okay. So in that case, you had explicit knowledge, you had an explicit memory for this portion of it. So you noticed that when you go far right, oftentimes you went back to right. So in that case, you notice that particular portion of the pattern. So that would count as explicit memory. But the rest of it then would be implicit memory if you didn't know the rest of the pattern. And it's interesting that, you know, they're in explicit and implicit memory, and we'll see a little bit of that today when we look at Clive wearing. It's always very difficult to kind of exactly draw the line and say this task is 80% explicit memory and 20% implicit memory. So we always have like a little bit, you know, here and a little bit there. So again, if you remember your password, a lot of that is explicit because you actually can say, oh, this is my password. A lot of it is implicit because you just know the keyboard, you know, movements for it. So there's always a bit of a combination, and it's oftentimes in these experimental situations you can really kind of cleanly divide the two. All right, any other comments, ideas? All right, so now we're going to take a look at the actual evidence for different memory structures. So we saw some evidence here for different memory structures. There seems to be a different type of memory that's explicit and a different type of memory that's implicit. But other evidence for different memory structures comes not just from performance, but some of the strongest evidence comes from specific functional deficits. So when one aspect of memory is impaired, and only that aspect of memory is impaired, that is very good evidence that you have different memory structures, you have different memory mechanisms that are at work in your mind. So if somebody loses their long-term memory, but is still able to use their working memory is intact, their long-term memory is impaired, that is very good evidence that these two memory processes, systems, are actually different things. They're not just definitional, they're actually in our mind separated and different. So specific functional deficits when one aspect of memory is impaired but the other aspect remains intact. So again, that is why these distinctions here are still in use today, and that is why nobody is talking about blue memory and nobody is talking about Spider-Man memory, because people have lost their short-term memory, but they have maintained their long-term memory. People have lost their long-term memory, but they can still use their working memory. So specific losses of these three systems have occurred while the other two have remained intact, and that would not happen if they were all just memory. If it was all just in a shared area of your mind called memory, then losing one, you would impair the others as well. But because you can impair one and not the others, that's very strong evidence that there must be subserved by different mechanisms. And again, nobody has ever lost blue memory and maintained their ability in spider memory. Yep.
Quick question.
Sure.
So when we're talking about types of memory, like short-term and long-term memory, or do we consider those to be like worked on in different parts of the brain, or is it like one part of the brain using different processes to store information?
When you get functional deficits, oftentimes it's because of brain injuries. And if that's the case, then it is most likely due to different areas of the brain being used. So if it's in the same area of the brain, it could be still separated in your mind, but it's harder to get to it from a lot of the classic studies have to do with brain injury because you're going to injure, that same area of your brain. So so it is. That's a very good question because a lot of things that are actually separate in your mind are still being done by kind of the same areas of your brain. So we look not for specific functional deficits, but we look for differences in terms of performance, right? One versus the other. Can you separate those out? All right, so evidence for different memory structures. Let's take a look at some of these specific impairments. So we're going to take a look at Clive Waring and the documentary Life Without Memory. So Clive Waring contacted the virus herpes simplex encephalitis, and this damaged his hippocampus. The hippocampus is one of the most important per gram areas of your brain. If you ever need to lose an area of your brain, don't lose the hippocampus. It controls so many things. Unfortunately for Clive, his hippocampus got damaged. So he was left with both anterograde and retrograde amnesia. So retrograde amnesia is your kind of typical amnesia. You can't remember things that occurred in the past. Anterograde amnesia is you can no longer form memories that are occurring to you after the incident. So you basically have no future ability to form memories. So Clive, because of that, was living, again, in a window of time where whatever he was aware of was his entire existence for that period.
Is this kind of like the movie, like 51st Dates? Have you seen that movie?
I have seen that movie. It's worse than 51st Dates because she, in 51st Dates, she had a very convenient Hollywood memory impairment. She had anterograde amnesia. She did not have the retrograde amnesia. Actually, does anybody know psychologists have analyzed the way that memory is portrayed in movies? Does anybody know which movie showed the most accurate portrayal of memory impairments? It's Finding Nemo. Dory is the most psychologically accurate impairment of memory. And the 51st Dates, the big falsehood in that one is the reset every single time she wakes up. That doesn't happen. It's a good movie though. I enjoyed it. All right, so much of his memory is impaired, but we'll notice that some memories are intact. So this is going to be a nice illustration of a very dramatic difference between explicit and implicit memories. And again, this is evidence for different memory structures. So the fact that his long-term memory is gone, but his working memory is still intact, that's an indication that those are different structures. The fact that his explicit memory gone, but his implicit memory seems to be still intact, evidence that those are actually two different structures. So we're going to take a look at this, a video of this right now. Just so you know, this will not be posted on YouTube because of copyright restrictions, but the link is there in your in the notes, and you do have access to this as students here at IUSB. So this is a video on demand educational thing. So just so you know, you won't see it on the YouTube channel, but you still should have access to it. So here we go. Clive Waring, Living Without Memory. I will pause occasionally to comment on it, but let's take a look at his impairments. All right, so that was Clive talking to his wife. And right off the bat, we see a difference between explicit memory and implicit memory. So the explicit memory is pretty clear. He has never seen anything before in his life. So he's looking back on his memories, and it's just darkness, right? This is the first time he's seen anything. This is the first time he's tasted anything, smelled anything. So that's his explicit memory. He cannot bring that to consciousness. He cannot bring episodic memory is gone as well. So that's his explicit memories are gone. What evidence there, right in that just first little bit, is there that his implicit memories are still intact?
Well, he remembers what taste and sound and sight are.
So he remembers what taste and sound and sight are. That could be semantic, though, as well, because that would be knowledge of things. Okay. So some of his semantic memory, as we'll see, must be intact. But
does he know who his wife is?
We're going to see that in just a little bit as well. He does, thankfully. But think about what would happen if you were in that position where you opened your eyes and you have never seen anything, you have never tasted anything, and all of a sudden you're in this world.
Because he's not like distressed. Like he understands that he should be seeing these things, and his body's sort of used to like light.
Exactly. Exactly. He should be freaking out, like massive, right? So think about, I mean, the closest analogy I could come up with in my mind is try to think back when you were a little child and you saw a huge animal for the first time. You saw an elephant for the first time, right? You go to the museum and you see one of those, big mastodons. Usually kids are like, oh my gosh, what is that? And you're like, oh, that's a mastodon. Well, he should be just losing his mind. He should be like, what is this? What is this thing over here I've never seen? Who are you? There's other people? Oh my gosh. But he's not, right? Because he has this implicit memory, this memory without awareness, that what he's experiencing is not so out of the ordinary that he needs to have that emotional reaction. So keep an eye out for those differences and things that he experiences implicitly versus the knowledge that, or the explicit awareness that is gone. So, thankfully, some of his implicit memories are intact, including his emotional memories for his wife, because as soon as she walked into the room, bursts out in song, gives her a hug, gives her a kiss, and she asks him, do you know who I am? And he's like, nope, never seen you before in my life. No explicit memory for you whatsoever. But you'll notice that right now there's a possibility. Maybe he's implicitly remembering her. Maybe he's just an incredibly amorous individual, and this is what he does for everybody. You're going to see she's the only one that he treats that way. So even though explicit memory, gone, he has no idea who she is, implicit memory, as soon as he sees her, there's that joy, there's that happiness. He knows how to react to her. He's got that procedural memory of, this is a person that I hug and I kiss. I don't know why, but I know that it's appropriate. And again, that's an intact, implicit memory, good evidence that those two are actually very different. All right, so just to point out a few more differences here. So his working memory seems to be intact because he can play patience. He can carry on a conversation. So he is able to store some amount of information, at least for a short period of time, right? Because otherwise, it would just be, oh, hi, I haven't seen you in forever. It's like, oh, well, what did you do today? Oh, hi, I haven't seen you in forever. It's like, how are you feeling today? Oh, hi. So clearly he's got some working memory, but he has no ability to hang on to things that would fall outside of that kind of working memory limitation. And that's why when she asked him, when Deborah asked Clive, do you remember when I came in? Just something that happened a couple of minutes before, he had no idea. She could have been there for an hour. She could have been there for 20 minutes. She could have been there for a day. He had no idea when she came in. So again, it's that difference of impairments. The working memory seems to be intact. Short-term memory, not so much. Long-term memory, absolutely not. Was it? Mm-hmm.
What does the game patience mean?
It's solitaire.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. At least that's, yeah, I figure it's solitaire. Yep.
Okay, so this is probably like kind of an out there question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that with like modern medicine or everything, or even getting him like a replacement, could they give him a new hippocampus? Is that like even possible?
Not at the present time. They are doing things with regrowing neurons. It used to be very bleak that when you were a child your brain was developing and new neurons were being generated, and then that was it. You just kind of lost them as you went on.
Right.
Now they actually are being able to regrow neurons. I would say, help for him is decades, in the future, because he lost so much of such an important specialized area that I don't know if it would ever be possible. But I mean, the things we do today were impossible 200 years ago. But it just kind of shows you how, I guess, centralized and localized this was, because everything else about him, you'll see in just a little bit, other skills that he has is kind of intact. You just cannot form those memories. There was
Now she refers to them as moments. He's in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
So is there some length of time that his moment lasts? I mean, is it just when she walks out the door and comes back in, or if she's sitting there for an hour, does he go through more than one moment of awakening?
It seems that he has, basically, as long as he's paying attention, he will be able to maintain that particular instance. So, and it's an excellent question, because one of the things that kind of makes you is your ability to kind of remember beforehand and have this long line of you-ness, right? That's what your episodic memory is. And he's kind of lost that. So I think it's kind of his situation, to give another movie analog, if you've seen Memento, and actually Dory once again, I think that's where he sort of is. Where as long as he's kind of focused on you and he's maintaining, that in his working memory, because he can carry on a conversation, he's not surprised to see you again. But again, the things that he's not focusing on, like when did she come in, he doesn't have that in his memory. And I know they don't kind of show it here with Clive Waring, but I know of other cases where people have this type of damage, where their short-term memory is very impaired. They oftentimes will isolate themselves from other people, from their family and their friends, because they lose the ability to carry on a conversation, because they'll bring the same thing up over and over again because they forgot that they already talked about it. And then they see the reactions of people and they realize that, oh my gosh, is this the 12th time I've brought up, this today? And they'll just try to avoid that and they'll lose that. So where exactly his moment ends is I don't think it's ever made explicit in the documentary. Yep.
Has his personality really shifted? Because like you said, like who we are is a lot of like what we remember about ourselves, but he seems like he carries on a lot of even how he approaches. You know what I mean? Like I don't greet my husband that way. That's not my personality. But he seems to have a lot of those intact things that are a part of like a personality.
Yeah, it seems like they have been maintained, which again kind of draws light on where's your personality sort of come from.
Yeah.
So that would argue, because we're going to see he does have implicit memories. We've already seen he has implicit memories. That would argue that a lot of your kind of personality traits are done without your awareness, right? They're done without you being consciously aware of it. The one thing though that has changed, and they mentioned this, he did have damage to his frontal lobe, which is where you kind of exercise impulse control. So he does, and you're going to see it in just a moment, he's easier to anger, and frustration. So that part of it has probably changed. But, considering how Deborah interacts with him, he seems to be the same person.
He doesn't remember his children then? Because he said in the interview basically he forgot the daughter. He remembers his wife.
Well, he remembers her name, right, because he wrote it in his diary. But you'll notice that when she walks through the door, he's not like, Deborah, so that I don't know where, I Love Deborah is coming from. But it's one of those things where, again, it's really hard to kind of draw the line. There was
Does he live like in isolation?
Yes, he's in a care facility. Yep. Because and we'll see in the second part of this, they basically can't do anything for him. He lives in a care facility so that his remaining days can be pleasant. And they have to train the entire staff how to talk to him, because memory is such a core component of what we are that is incorporated into our into our language, even if we don't realize it. So they'll give this example later coming up where you can't ask him, how are you doing today? Something that is completely appropriate, right? How are you doing today? Because how are you doing today implies that you remember how you were doing yesterday, right? So he gets agitated when people ask him that question. So they really have to talk about the present. So how are you feeling? That's fine. I'm feeling fine. Pleasant weather we're having, right? Not oh my gosh, this is the coldest day ever, right? You can't say that because that implies you have a memory of previous days. So we're going to see it's so fundamental that it's even incorporated in our language, and it's not part of his experience anymore. Mm-hmm.
Is your amygdala the one with the feeling?
Yes, amygdala is important in emotions.
And that's not damaged, right?
No, I think it's mostly his hippocampus that got damaged. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm not sure if I just misheard what he said, but I thought that he said something about this is the first time he's been conscious since he's been ill. Like, does he have implicit knowledge of the fact that this is because he's sick?
He does. So we're gonna see that just the same way that he's not surprised, that he's awake for the first time. I mean, he does write it down, but it's not the momentous event that it should be, right? For that experience. There does seem to be some explicit memories that are formed. So later on when they test him, it does seem that he has learned a couple of names since he had his illness. So it could be that he is aware that he has an illness. But again, is that kind of like an implicit, memory that I don't know, maybe comes out in language? But if you asked him, are you ill? He might not say, yes, I am. Definitely, if you ask him when it had happened, he'd be like, I have no idea. But it is interesting to kind of really analyze what is it that he knows, because sometimes it seems as if he does have like almost 0%, but maybe just a little bit of an ability to form those explicit memories.
Does he know his own name? Does he know who he is?
I would imagine so.
Okay.
He doesn't talk in the third person very much, so it's kind of hard to know.
Okay.
If he was a rapper from the 90s, we could answer that question.
Same.
All right, so nice example there of the difference between episodic memory and semantic memory. So even just walking up there, he's like, I have never seen a note of music ever. Well, then how do you know how do you know it's a note of music, right? You should be saying things like, I've never seen a pound of music. I've never seen, 12 kilograms of music. I don't know what that is, right? No, but he knows it's a note of music. And when he sits down at the piano, he's never seen a piano before. Episodic memory gone, but semantic memory, boom, he goes right into it. Combined with procedural memory, because he's practiced this 1,000 times, the hands go up, he knows how to conduct. So a nice distinction there between episodic and semantic. That twitch, they're gonna kind of talk about it a little bit. It's a little bit of a mystery to me. I'm not entirely sure what it's all about, but there is something that we kind of take for granted, which is switching between tasks. It's usually very smooth for us to go from like one kind of cognitive function and go to another. And for whatever reason, because of his damage, when he comes off of some tasks and goes to another task, there seems to be this physical twitch that occurs, indicating that part of the areas of his brain that he lost is also important in that switching between mechanisms that we do. All right, so that was part one of Clive Waring. And we're going to now take a look at part two. This picks up, I believe, 13 years if I'm not mistaken, after what occurred here. And this one, they actually have a psychologist visit him and test his implicit and explicit memories. So we're going to see a very nicely kind of controlled laboratory example of the differences between those two types of memory. All right, so once again, a very nice example that his implicit memory must be intact, because if you take a look at his experience, every place is a new place, right? If you're coming alive in conscience for the first time, then anywhere you are is going to be a new place. However, he reacts differently to an actual new place than a familiar place that he's been in before. So he might have no explicit knowledge or explicit memory of this particular institution, but implicitly, he's familiar. Implicitly, he remembers it and knows that this is a safe place. When he goes to a new place, he doesn't have that implicit memory to draw on, and he has that emotional experience of, okay, this is very anxious inducing. So once again, you see that difference between explicit conscious memory and this implicit awareness. All right, so, whoops, there goes my drink. So we mentioned priming before. And this, what we saw right now, was actually a very nice example of the fact that the priming aspect of implicit memory is still working in Clive. So if you remember when he was in the first video, when he was on that park bench and he was talking to Deborah, and he's like, it's as if I've been alive, you know, for the first time. No touch, no taste, no sound, no smell, nothing, right? There was a regular speed to the way that he talked. He was like, look, there's no touch, there's no taste, there's no sound. You look at him now, and how does he say it? He's like, there's no touch, no taste, no sound, no smell, no nothing. It's like, this is if I'm awake for the first time. No touch, no taste, no smell, no sound, no nothing. It's fast because he's practiced it, and he said this so many times that now no touch primes no taste primes no smell. So he ripped through the entire five senses, whereas before it was at a lot slower pace. So that's an example of priming, and that's an example of implicit memory. So you might not ever remember explaining this to Deborah before, but clearly his the priming effect indicates that he has implicit memory of going through this before.
Do you know what happened?
All right, so this is a psychologist, and she's going to be testing his memory. And notice that she's telling him it's totally fine to guess because she's trying to probe for any levels of memory. All right, so she's asking him. She showed him four doors, and now she's one of those doors is in here, and there's 3 distractor doors, and she's just asking him, which door have you seen before? So that which door have you seen before is a test of explicit memory. So which door do you consciously remember having been in the 4 pages that I just flipped? Do you remember that? And he very clearly is saying, I have no idea. You know, I can't remember any of them. So then she asks him, she goes, well, just try to guess. You know, just guess which one it is. And what psychologists have found is that even if you cannot explicitly remember something, you might have that implicit unconscious awareness of that particular stimulus. So what they found is that if you ask somebody to just guess, you can't explicitly remember what it is, but you just ask them to guess, they will oftentimes guess at a higher rate than chance, which in this case would be 25%. So it's quite possible that when she says, you know, guess, that he would say, if I had to guess, it would be this door. And if he had any implicit memory for that, he would be correct, right? He would more often be correct than incorrect. And then notice that Deborah just asks him, does either of them feel more familiar, right? So do you have that implicit kind of feeling that, you know, I don't know why, it's kind of like when you have deja vu. I don't know why this feels familiar, but it just kind of does. So I'm going to pick that door. That would also be an example of implicit memory. And then the neuropsychologist goes even one step further, and she goes, which one do you think is most aesthetically pleasing, right? Which one do you like the best? And what psychologists have found is that familiarity often increases liking. So just being familiar with something would mean that you increase the liking for it. So if you, for example, show people the picture of the Mona Lisa and a mirror inverted picture of the Mona Lisa and ask them which one is oriented the right way, they might not be able to say. But if you ask them which one do you like better, they will pick the one in the proper orientation because that's the one that they're more familiar with. So familiarity breeds liking is what they say. And she's just asking, hey, forget about which one you saw. Which one do you like better? And more often than not, he'll point to the one that he actually saw because that's the one he's familiar with. And that's oftentimes what drives liking. So she's trying to assess his implicit memory. Unfortunately, in this trial, he's not cooperating. All right, so the rest of this is just another look at his brain functions. And we'll pick it up after the brain functions next time in class, just kind of wrap it up. But that was a very nice example at the end about Clive's semantic memory. And his memory for facts and for things, she mentioned that his semantic memory is vastly impaired. So he doesn't remember who the queen is, doesn't remember who a lot of famous people are, doesn't remember a lot of facts from previous to his injury. And but he does remember other things. So if you remember, he knows what a piano is, he knows what coffee is. He will mention, I've never seen black or white before, so he knows the names of colors. So that would be a nice indication that in semantic memory, there's also a division between kind of factual knowledge and more, I guess, basic or general knowledge. And then just to kind of leave you with this thought. So the timeline here, it wasn't 13 years, I think, since the first video, but it's been 13 years since his impairment. And he has learned 5 things, right? 5 things that he doesn't even, you can't question him about it directly, but he'll just indicate, that he is aware of it. And, just think about it, 5 things in 13 years, how extensive that memory impairment is. And yet other things are completely still intact. Mm-hmm.
Is he alive?
Last time I checked, yes. I haven't checked this year. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, and other thing. I mean, it's really interesting once you start delving into it. He does seem to know that, yeah, my illness occurred in the mid-'80s. He does seem to know that he's in his 60s. And it does show you that there is some sort of implicit memory going on, because if it's been 13 years and he looks at his hands and they're the hands of an older, individual, that should freak you out. Think of tomorrow morning, you wake up and your face is aged 20 years, what your reaction would be. And yet for him, there's some awareness, implicit knowledge that this is not, not new. And interestingly, though, that he's awake for the first time seems to be getting stronger. So that he hasn't habituated to, that need to write things down. And it might be that he's becoming more and more agitated and more pronounced because he realizes that his old ways of writing things just didn't convey the importance with other people of what he was trying to say. So then it got much more dramatic, so that when they look at it, they're like, oh my gosh, all caps. This is a big event. Whereas, because for him, I think, again, that implicit memory that people just aren't getting it. They're not understanding it. So I got to go bigger. I got to go bolder. All right, so we're going to wrap up Clive next time and continue on with our look at memory. And if all the makeups are completed by next class, I'll also try to hand back the exams. Other than that, we are done for the day.